While line drawing alone is great, using color can make it even more compelling. I'll show you some techniques for quickly adding watercolor highlights to your sketches. In this lesson, I'll show you how to enhance your line drawings with some splashes of bright color. I have a few techniques that can unify your drawings through color, like painting the rainbow and thinking in threes. Color is like jewelry for your sketch. It can make your drawing sing and complete the work, even when it's something that you dashed off in a few minutes. But like jewelry, you want just enough to set off what you're wearing, but not so much that it becomes too gaudy. So this is a sketch that I did from a car, and I'll be adding some color to it. So I'm using a regular brush here with my water, and this is something I might do if I just brought my pen on location and didn't bring my colors along. And I'm using this here to show you some stuff that you can do easier with this kind of brush than a water brush. So I'm gonna go right in and start coloring. And what I'm gonna try to do is not get too precious about the detail. So I'm not necessarily going to follow the lines that I made. I'm gonna start out here with the road. The road is, you know, a gray color, as roads usually are, but I like to actually push the color a little bit. And because I have a lot of green that I'm gonna be putting in the sketch because of the trees, I'm actually gonna go a little bit toward the complementary color, which is red. So I'll start out with my red here, a dark red, and then maybe add a little bit of its complement green to brown it out, and a little bit of blue to add some gray. So notice that I'm kind of making a little bit of a muddy mixture, but I want it to go a little bit red so that it reads as red in the sketch. And I'm gonna go in and go ahead and put in some of that. And I'm making a pretty wet puddle here because I want to be very, very loose, not too precious about this at all. Leaving white space as well because I want those sparkly highlights. It's always nice to kind of leave a little to the imagination. I'll put in a little bit more of those browner colors, the green and blue that made it a little bit grayish brown, just to get the sense that it's still not quite a red, even though that's kind of the general color that I want it to be. So I'm kind of graying it out, as you can see here. You'll see that I don't mind having puddles form, and I'm not really getting too much within the lines. Sometimes, you know, the puddles will stray outside the lines. That's okay, because I'm really going for that loose feel for this sketch. So next I'm gonna go in and do some of these greens. I like to kind of paint around my sketch. So for these greens, I'm gonna use my sap green as my kind of lighter shade here. It's a beautiful kind of rich, light green. Adding water, again, getting a nice puddle going. And to that, I'm gonna add a little bit of my yellow and really get a little bit of a mixture here of my yellowish green on one side, maybe my sap green directly here on the other, and going right in, I'm gonna just dab around. I don't mind if it splatters a little bit. I'm just really kind of dabbing around to get the sense that these trees were sort of on the side of the road and they extended along the sides of this road. And notice how I can really kind of get some nice puddly textures by just dabbing around with my brush. I'm gonna vary my color a little bit, adding a little bit of red here to vary the color as I move along. And what you'll see me do a little bit here is really kind of not going into too much detail about where I'm putting this. I'm not necessarily sure where the trees ended or where some of this other stuff began, but it doesn't matter. I really want to kind of just a general sense of where this green was sitting there. And already you can see that it reads as kind of a road and some green trees, and I've only put really 2 colors down so far, right? So just even a little bit can really add so much to the sketch. Okay, so I'm liking how that is looking there. I'm gonna go ahead and go a little bit darker in the background here. And it's still trees, but these trees were on the darker side. I'm going to go into my bluer green, again with my darker red, really getting a rich, intense dark green and going in with that. So one thing I want to do here is getting a little bit creative with my colors. So even though these trees are generally green, what I want to do is actually paint a little bit of the rainbow. And by that I mean going through and using my palette, and even if it's not quite in accordance with what I saw, I like to actually have a little bit of light dancing around the page. And what I do there is look at my palette. I have kind of the red family, the yellow family, the blue family. So I'm going to actually just go ahead and think about how I can incorporate some of those different color families throughout the sketch. So I'll go into my blue here and maybe kind of use some highlights, especially in those darker areas where it's in the distance, and in the distance it was a little more indistinct, so the light doesn't hit it as much, so I can go a little bit bluer in my trees there. And I'll do that wherever I can kind of see maybe some shadow shapes, maybe on the base of the tree where the light might not have hit. So really kind of not mixing it in. I'm really kind of dabbing it. As you'll see, I'm not mixing or scrubbing that color in. And I'll kind of go around the page a little bit. Where else can I add this blue? I can maybe add it along the road, maybe a little bit in this clump of bushes here as well. And as you can see, we've used a little bit of yellow and red and blue tones, so it's starting to unify that sketch. So as an example, I've done something like this in the sketch of Cleveland, Ohio that I did here. I was looking outside a hotel room window and looked at the bridge, the warehouses beyond it, the river, a little bit of detail in the foreground, and really used a lot of tones in my palette to unify this image. So you'll see I used blues, reds, yellows, really kind of painted the rainbow there. Another example is this sketch that I did of a mosque in Singapore, where again, you can see that the entire rainbow of colors is represented. I have some focal points in there, just as I did with the bridge. Here it's the dome, which is on the yellowish red side, but you'll see that reflected in the ground, in some parts of the tree, etc., and really all around the sketch, and similarly just going around my palette and using those colors. So let's go back to the sketch here, and I'm going to continue to add some color here. And one thing I do actually to add some highlights is I try to use a particularly bright color 3 times in the sketch. And so here I'm actually thinking that because we have some nice colors that are on the duller or grayer side, I'm going to start adding some brighter colors around the margins. I see that I have some cars here, a little bit of this ground area here and here, which actually forms a nice little triangle, which can balance that out. So let's go in and add some brighter color. Again, I'm not worrying about what the reality was here. I'm really thinking about what might go well to harmonize the sketch. So here I'm actually going to add in a little bit of some of my orangey red, because it's really kind of now hemmed in by these blue patches. So I want to go a little bit deeper here. So I'm going to go in and go right into a bright red. And I'm going to clean off a little bit of my palette here to give myself a nice clean mixing space, especially when I have sort of these muddy or duller colors that I've made. It's good to have a clean mixing space when you're going into a new color. So I'm going to go into my red, and then I'm going to go into my bright yellow and make a nice orangey red. And this is a nice color that I'm going to use to really highlight this ground area. And again, really just dabbing in, highlighting. And notice how that already is just drawing the eye toward that receding line of the road there. Not doing too much there, and I don't want to add too much detail to say what that is. I'm letting people use their imagination as to what exactly that is. So I'm going to go in and maybe vary it a little bit for the other side, continuing with this idea of using kind of these highlights or bright color 3 times around. So going into this area, and here I'm going to just be a little bit more toward the trees because that's where my blue is. So I want it to kind of set off that blue. There's some kind of a structure here that was sitting at the side of the road, which I want to highlight in another color. But really kind of adding these dashes and getting that nice bright color in there. And then I might actually go in and use this again. So for one of the cars, and for this one I might vary it up a little bit. So I'll go in and add a little bit of red, my dark red. Again, staying within this sort of orangey red, but just varying it a little bit. And I'm going to go in and paint in this car. I want it to be really nice and kind of highlighted there. So I'm going to paint in this car. I don't know whether that car was red, but it doesn't matter because in my world it's red. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in. As I go through, I'm going to actually do a little more of these car shapes in here. Maybe one of them was a nice bright blue. And let's say that's a blue car there on the side of the road. Again, thinking about my rainbow and how do I kind of unify everything. So I've got some blues there. Maybe I'll add in a little bit of that blue, but maybe dull it out with some of that red that I had on my palette as I go through and put in some dashes here. Again, not really too worried about what's going on in the actual scene, but I wanted to put in these highlights to draw the eye toward what's going on. So again, I might add some of this back there, just adding some dots and dashes of color to have the eye kind of go in around my sketch and dance around a little bit. So one thing I want to add here as I start kind of wrapping this up is a little bit of very bright yellow highlights because road markings are often yellow. I'm going to wipe off that yellow, make sure I have a nice clean palette space to do that with. So whenever you get to a place where you want to get some really good saturated or bright color, you want to wipe it off and really just get all traces of other colors off of your palette there. Okay, so I have a nice bright yellow that I'm going to start just putting a little bit on there and get it onto my palette. And just with the tip of my brush, I'm going to highlight some of these road markings. They could have been white, but that's okay. So you'll see how that adds a little bit of my rainbow element yet again. So I might add some dashes of this really saturated color in other areas as well to just highlight some other areas. One nice place to use a bright yellow is also on tops of trees because there could be some light hitting at the very top. So that's a nice way to highlight some light. So I might do that. And a fun thing to do when you have some fun saturated color is to spatter. So in order to spatter, I'm going to get a nice big puddle of color. I might add a little bit of the orange in there. And I'll use my finger and just tap so that I get some little dribs and drabs all over just to add a couple highlights. So there you have it. A little bit of a rainbow. It still reads as a road and it still reads as two kind of edges receding into space, but it's much more fun than probably if I had literally painted all the colors that I saw on the scene. I hope this class has given you the confidence to pick up your sketchbook and take advantage of the free minutes in your day to sketch what you see. My sketchbook is my journal, really my visual diary of what I see in the world, and it's my way to record my experiences. I hope it'll become the same for you. I'm Suma CM, and this has been Urban Sketching in 15 Minutes a Day.